Welcome to Game Design Hour, the podcast where I interview the people behind the video games you love. On today's episode, I'm interviewing Sander Ambroos about his work on the video game Sizeable. Let's get into the interview. What was the first thing that sparked your interest in creating video games?
Well, I've always been interested in everything that has to do with games, really. I've been interested since like a young age. I used to make like small card games or board games for my classmates. So when the opportunity arose that I could actually like go and study game design in Belgium, then I immediately jumped on it and I really wanted to do it. So I met my two colleagues there as well. So it's been something that has been an interest since a young age. So
how did you first learn how to create video games?
Well, through school. I've tried, like I tried before school, like following some YouTube tutorials on Unity and stuff. But most of the things I learned, like everything I learned, is mostly from school. And then afterwards, when I got the basics, I started experimenting myself and doing some side projects. And then from other people as well, of course. A lot of help came from my classmates because I wasn't the best programmer in the beginning. So most of the stuff, yeah, school.
After school, how did you first get into the video game industry?
I met Bo and Jonathan at school. Bo was a classmate of mine, and Jonathan was like a year higher. But one night I was just talking to Bo that I really wanted to like start something and create video games, and he wanted to as well. And we knew for a fact that Jonathan was also interested in like starting his own studio and stuff. So then we just started talking and started planning some stuff and seeing if we could work together properly. So we participated in the GMTK Game Jam of 2019, I think, just to see if like can we work together, and it's fun to work together. And it turns out it was, and it worked. So then in like 2020 we started Business Goose Studios, and it's been going on since then.
How did you first think of the idea for Sizeable?
Sizeable was my master's degree project. So we had to pick a subject for our master's project, and I picked exploration in video games. So I played around with a lot of like different types of exploration, and eventually stumbled upon the idea of Sizeable by accident, actually, because I was testing another prototype about like switching between different planes of like the same world and like going to a different theme and stuff. And one of the first ideas I had was switching between like a small world and a big world. And I liked the idea of like going small and big so much that I actually switched my idea around and focused more on like the rescaling stuff and resizing stuff. And that's where Sizeable actually came from. Yeah, it's just a lot of research beforehand, and then a small accent with a prototype. And then some more suggestions of other games, and then researching what other games did right and how I could use those ideas in my own game and stuff.
How long did you work on Sizeable for the school project?
Most of 2019 and 2020, and then it went on till March 2021. So after school, I also worked on Sizeable as well. But then in the start of 2021, so like 2 months before we actually released, I brought it into the studio because I first was always planning like, oh, let's make it a solo project and bring it out as a solo project. But then afterwards, I brought it into the studio once we started, and then for like last 2 months, Bo and Jonathan also helped on some finalizing stuff. And then afterwards, all the updates, of course, like 90% of the art is all Bo and Jonathan afterwards. After I told them some stuff about the art, of course, how to do it.
What were some of your biggest inspirations behind Sizeable?
It's pretty broad, actually. Some are a bit weirder than others. Like one of the first inspirations is the Grow games. It's like a Flash game series. And because of like the small spot, and like you have to manipulate everything in the right order to make like the new places open up and stuff. So that was a big inspiration for Sizeable. Some other stuff is like Monument Valley for its simplicity. Other exploration games just for their art style. Like Firewatch and stuff, like low poly style. But others also, like Binding of Isaac is a weird one. But I took that as an inspiration because one of the main elements that makes Binding of Isaac so fun is combining all the different items into your character and seeing what comes out of it, like what new ability is created. So that's something also I brought into Sizeable, like having all these different elements in the scene and having them interact with each other to do something new, like in the Grow games, open up something else. Those are some of the inspirations for Sizeable.
The main mechanic of Sizable is growing and shrinking objects. Were there any other possible mechanics that you were thinking about adding alongside of those mechanics?
Well, another major one is like picking stuff up and placing it somewhere else. Actually try to not add too many others, because I always thought, like, let's make Sizeable like a very simple game that everyone can play, even like your grandma who doesn't play a lot of games, for example. If she wants to enjoy something fun, Sizeable may be a good idea because it's so simple. I always wanted to just design around like the one mechanic, which is growing and shrinking, and then the picking up is added because it's needed to interact with some other stuff, of course. But I didn't really think about adding any other. I just always wanted to design around this one specific mechanic, actually.
Managing scope is a big part of designing games. How did you work to manage the scope of Sizeable while you were working on it?
Well, I always said, like, okay, it doesn't need to be like a huge, like 5-6 hour game, because it was always meant to be like a small, solo developed project. I just wanted to get a game out there. So at first I set myself like the goal of, okay, let's go for around like between 21 to 30 levels for the first release, and then maybe if the game does well, I'll start adding some small updates. So I could, because it was always during my master's degree, I didn't really have to watch out for scope. I just wanted to see like, oh, let's just add levels and see how many levels I can get out by the end of my master's degree, and then just go by then. And then I ultimately ended up with like 24 or 25 levels on launch, I think, which was the initial plan. It was just, I set myself like a limit beforehand, so I didn't go like overboard with going like, oh, massive new levels and 3,000 levels, for example, to exaggerate. So I just set myself a goal beforehand. My teachers always set me like, set yourself a goal and a deadline and a limit for everything, so you don't go overboard with adding new stuff and keeping adding new stuff. So.
Throughout the game, there are some levels that play with traveling through space and time. Were there any different level concepts like that you considered that are different from the main style of the levels that you have throughout the game?
I don't think I shift too much from what I initially thought levels would be. There's one idea that has always been there, like going like bigger levels with like 4 or 5 pillars. So that would be like the biggest shift, I think, in how levels are designed. Everything was always meant to be like every scene has its own type of puzzles and interactions. The sky was really the limit. It didn't really matter what if you suddenly went like with 3 or 4 time travel things, or like 2 different scenes, like like above ground and underground and stuff. So I don't think there's any scene that's like beyond the things I thought in the beginning Sizeable would be.
Another big part of game development is fixing bugs. Were there any strange or interesting bugs that you came across while working on Sizeable?
Lots. Because it was a master's project, of course, it's not like you're not very good at programming then. So I encountered like a lot of strange bugs. One of them, like in the very beginning, was for some reason you could like keep increasing stuff, so people would like bump into like the whole map would become like one giant tree because I kept increasing the size of stuff, or the sound would bug out, and it's like an ear deafening error sound when you kept going too big or too small. And one is on my Twitter, I think. I once posted one on my Twitter where I was like testing some stuff out for the golf level, but for some reason, like once a golf ball spawned, it duplicated, so it kept spawning like golf balls, and more golf balls would like keep filling up the level. So there's like a gif or a gif on somewhere on my Twitter that I posted once.
Were there any interesting puzzle concepts that you have that just never made it into the game?
Not that I can think of right now. There's a lot of stuff that's been tested when we design like a level, because it's always like just pick a theme, put some stuff like 3D models in there, and just see what we come up with all the different objects, what may interact with which part of the level and stuff. But I can't really think of like a specific puzzle that hasn't made it into a game because of some reason. Mostly when we think of a puzzle and it's like, it doesn't feel right, we just don't try it. Some puzzles, for example, are made like, oh, if you increase the size of this, then this will happen. But if it doesn't feel right, and it's just like, okay, you just increase the size, but it doesn't feel so correct. Like increasing the sun makes it warmer. It's just like, oh, I make this bigger because the game says I can make stuff bigger. Then they don't end up in the game. Of course, it has to make sense or do something fun and logical within the sizable limits.
Which parts of the game did you have to put the most time and effort into to get just the way you wanted?
Probably just the feeling of everything, like when you're resizing stuff and picking stuff and putting stuff down. It's probably the stuff I spent most time on in the beginning to get right, because it had to feel correct. Like, oh, you can only increase the size 3 times, or like small, medium, and big, but it does have to feel right why you can only do it 3 times, and the sounds need to be like fun and poppy, and like the animations have to be fun when you actually increase size of stuff, because that's the main part you're going to be doing. So probably game feel is the thing I spend most time on in the beginning. Afterwards, of course, every puzzle and theme having it like their own little diorama and being unique and stuff.
Are there any fun little details that you've put in the game that you think most players might miss?
There are some smaller references sometimes. There's like one in the space level. When you complete level, the turtle will appear on like a rocket ship, and it's like a rocket ship named after a song of one of my favorite bands. So there's like some little hidden things, and there's also in like the Valentine's level, I think some people didn't get the hand, but you had to like put a ring on the hand, and the hand took it away, and then you get an achievement like Precious. So some people didn't know it was from Lord of the Rings, but it was like I try to put like a lot of my own like interests and stuff into the game. That's why the turtle is in there as well, because he's a reference to my pet turtle Pippin. So that's a big reason. So the whole game is full of like little hints of my interests and stuff.
How large was the team that worked on the game after your masters?
3 people. And 4 if you include Jamal Green, who did the music, which is fantastic, of course. But 3 people most of the time, and then the music is 4.
What was your process for creating each of the different puzzles?
Well, I kind of told this before, but it's mostly just we think of theme, and you look up some reference material, of course, to see like what objects could possibly be in a scene with that theme, and we then first make like a small diorama, make it feel pretty and fun and cozy, and then afterwards, when that's done, then we try to think of stuff that could be done with all the objects that's in there, and how could stuff react, and make new stuff to put in the scene when it's needed. I tried like designing puzzles once, like before I actually made the scene, and it proved to be like a lot more difficult because you didn't have like a proper reference to what you're actually interacting with and what you would be interacting with. So having the 3D work before the actual puzzle design was easier for us, which made me like maybe be a bit controversial, because most people say, oh no, you first like make some paper prototypes and stuff, but having it visually there was actually easier for this type of game.
Playtesting is a really important thing for puzzle games. How did you playtest Sizeable?
A lot of classmates and people from school who weren't in my class and who didn't play games tested the game. They're all in the credits as well. And then once COVID hit, because of course it was 2019 when I was doing my masters. It's like 2020 when it's so I put it on itch.io in 2020. When I didn't have the actual reach of people from school to test the game. And that's actually like the reason why I decided to continue with the game, because like it kind of blew up because of one video, and a lot of people tested the game there and were reporting bugs to me. Not all of them are of course in playtesters, but I summed them up like a collective bunch, like everyone who played the first versions and the later versions and reported bugs, because there's a lot of people that tried the initial itch launch. But that helped me out a lot with testing bugs and having the game feel right and stuff.
What was it like working on this video game throughout the pandemic?
Not a lot of has changed for me, because it was a solo project. I was just at home. The only thing that changed was, of course, my playtesters weren't there initially, and I had to find other people to playtest. And I could, of course, contact my classmates through Discord, but not everyone had like time and was also working on their project, so it was different. But for the most part, it didn't change much, because I could just stay at home and work on the game all day if I wanted to, which I couldn't do before that because I also had like friends to meet or family to visit or stuff. So
what was the biggest design challenge you faced while working on Sizeable?
The biggest challenge is also like one of the most fun things about it, that every diorama is so small, always has a different theme, and there's only like 3 objects to find. Is on one end very fun because it's like a limit you set yourself, and a challenge because every new puzzle is unique and every new level is unique. But it's also pretty difficult because you have to come up with like complete new concepts for each level. I can reuse some stuff, of course, if it fits in a level, but I can't like use the sun every level because it would get boring and people would know what to expect from that point. But the most fun of Sizeable is what would the level, like the next level be, what theme would the next level be, and what can I expect from like what objects interact with what and stuff. So that's probably the most difficult part as well, but the most fun as well.
Were there any level concepts that you had brainstormed at one point but never really turned into a level?
There are quite a few. I think one time I was like experimenting with a racetrack. I think one would be on Mars, but that eventually made it in. But first in like my master's key, I was experimenting with a level for Mars, and it didn't make it in. I think a circus once, like a zoo also. So there's like a lot of the themes. Once I wanted to make like different types of cities, which eventually turned into the World Wonders, like the Wonders of the World update instead of cities. So, but there's a whole list somewhere. I don't have it here, but it's like a whole list where stuff is crossed out that I actually did, and there's like 20 or 30 themes that haven't made it into the game.
Do you plan to eventually add some of those themes into the game in a future update?
Well, there's one more update planned, and it depends on what people make, because we added like the diorama mode once to just have people like have fun with all the models and stuff. And we plan on using people's creations as an inspiration for the last update, to have like a bit of a tribute to our community, which was very active. And we're very thankful for the people who were so active in our community during the whole development and release phase. So I don't know if those themes will be in the game because of all the inspiration that the community will give. But I don't think so because of it, because there's all these people have different ideas and stuff, so they might not make a racetrack.
In puzzle games, it's important to make sure that the levels aren't so difficult that players give up immediately, but still difficult enough that the players feel like they've achieved something when they finish it. How did you work to achieve this balance of difficulty?
Well, I always thought like each level in steps, like the initial levels in steps, like how many objects do you need to manipulate before you get to one pillar, for example. And in later levels and updates, this doesn't really get applied because of limitations and stuff in time. But like from level 1 to 21 is a bit more ramped up, because like most of the later levels have more steps than the first few levels. So that's one thing, and always and the other thing is always having the same 3 things to find and not having levels. So that the previous thing is like having it a bit more difficult. It's not a very difficult game, but having a bit more difficulty ramp. But like the other thing with the 3 pillars is it's not too hard to always find the same 3 objects. You know what you're looking for. It's not like each level suddenly adds like 3 more and 3 more to find and even 3 more to find. So to keep it like a bit more like streamlined and easier to play, because it was never meant as a like, oh, you're going to spend like 1 hour on one puzzle or something. It's always just meant to be fun, and you could accidentally even solve some puzzles just through exploration, which was actually a design feature. It wasn't like an accident, like, oh no, somebody figured it out by accident. No, it's actually part of the game. It's just experimenting and exploring, and if you find a pillar by accident, then there it is.
What game engine did you use to create Sizeable?
We used Unity to create Sizeable, and then used Blender and stuff for the 3D objects, mostly because it was free and we used to learn Unity in school. So that's the one I know. So I couldn't really make this in Unreal, I think.
Do you like Unity? Do you plan to use it on any future projects?
We use Unity on all our projects right now because the 3 of us all have learned to use Unity. I've once like tried messing with Unreal from like another colleague when I worked somewhere else, was like showing me some stuff. But I really like Unity. It's improved so much since like the early days when people were bashing like, oh, it's made with Unity, but it's actually a pretty good engine. There's a lot of stuff you can actually do in Unity pretty easily compared to Unreal. It's a lot more beginner friendly, I would say.
Looking back now, what do you wish you could have done differently before the initial launch of the game?
Maybe added a few more levels, get to the 30 mark instead of a 25, because the initial game was pretty short, and like we released a roadmap, which helped, of course, but most of the reviews said like, oh, it was very fun, but sadly it's so short. And like the first negative reviews we got were always like, oh, it's way too short for the price point or something. So probably you have a bit of a larger game at first, and then afterwards adding to it. This is probably my thing I regret the most or would want to change.
What is the biggest lesson you learned from working on Sizeable?
Oh, that's a very, very difficult question, actually. Well, the biggest lesson I learned is when you have an idea, is to try it out. Because at first, during my master's degree, I would always like draw stuff and think out the ideas and write everything down. And then afterwards think like, oh, maybe this is not a good idea. Let me try something else. But our teachers always told us like ideas are useless. Just try something, make a prototype. If it doesn't feel right, then maybe like throw it away immediately. Don't stick around it and try something else and keep adding to it. Throw it away, try something else. Prototypes work a lot better than just ideas, actually.
What would be your biggest piece of advice to a newer game dev trying to get their first game made?
My biggest advice would be like limit yourself. Don't go for too big of a scope, and try stuff out, and don't stick with like the same. Or don't attach yourself too much to like one prototype. If it doesn't feel right, don't try to fix it. Throw it out. Don't delete it, of course. Keep it, but try something else. Maybe you can learn something from that prototype and use it in another one, and eventually we'll get there. The thing will click when you find like the right thing you're looking for.
What's next for you? What are you working on now?
We're working on a lot of stuff. We're still, of course, working on like last update, which should launch somewhere this year, of course, but it's pretty busy with other projects. We're working together with CVS. They're from the Netherlands on a multiplayer game called Musical Chairs. We're also working on 30 Birds, which is a very pretty game by Ram Games. They're a studio from Brussels, and we're working on some other stuff that I can't tell, of course.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been great interviewing you.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
And that's how the interview went down. I want to thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, make sure to follow or subscribe. It's different on every platform. Also, if you think a friend might like the show, make sure to share it with them. If you want to keep up to date with what's going on with Game Design Hour, make sure to follow us on TikTok, Instagram, or Twitter at Game Design Hour. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I can see you next time. Bye.